Hey, so I'm Donovan. I'm the Family Programs Director at the Y. I'm going to be showing you today how to take a time-lapse sunrise photo. Now it is currently about 6:30. The sun is starting to rise behind me, and I have chosen a spot from which I can take my photo. Now I've already started setting things up here, so I'm going to kind of just show you what I'm doing. This is my camera setup, and this is what I'm looking at. Now, if you don't have a DSLR, that's okay. You can potentially do this with a cell phone. I've never tried it with a cell phone. Now, the one crucial thing that you would need to have is you do have to have a tripod. You absolutely have to have one. If you don't have a tripod, there's no way on earth you're going to get your camera to stay still enough for the entire time lapse. Now, what a time lapse is basically I'm just going to take about 900 or so photos from one location, and then using video editing software, I'm going to put them together and make them flow seamlessly together to sort of get a kind of a movie. Now, I have a Canon T5i, which I've had for about 4 years. It does a trick pretty well. Now, what I'm using for lenses, right now I have an 18 to 55 millimeter lens, just a standard like medium range lens. Then the other piece of equipment that you do need to have is you do need to have an intervalometer. Let me show you what that looks like. This is my intervalometer. Now, some cameras have one that is built in. My camera does not, so I have to use this. Now, what it does is if I press the button, it causes the camera to take a picture. Now, what I can also do is I can also set it so that I can set it so that it takes interval photos, which is what I'm going to want to do here. So the way mine works is you push the mode button, and then you can adjust the time lengths. Maybe. There we go. So this is what this is telling me is this is going to take photos. Once I turn it on start, it's going to take photos every 2 seconds, and it's going to do that for as long as I hold down as long as I have the switch flipped. Now, a good sunrise time lapse generally sits somewhere in the range of about 45 minutes that you're going to be sitting here. I typically start mine about 10 minutes before sunrise. Now, I'm sure you'll notice, like from this video, it looks like it is very bright out already, but the sun actually has not risen yet. So I'm going to start my time lapse about 10 minutes before the sun comes up, which should be in about 5 minutes. A few other things that you'll want to notice, I have on my camera, I have turned the autofocus off. The reason for that is that if you leave the autofocus on, your camera will adjust periodically to different changing conditions, and what that does is it causes your time lapse to look like it's zooming in and out really fast, which is very not ideal. I've ruined several time lapses by forgetting to turn that off. Now, I'm going to talk about how I set this up and why I chose where I did here in a minute. But for now, let's go ahead and let me show you one other setting before I get this set up. The way that I'm going to take this one is basically the first photo that I take is going to be pretty much completely black, and then the last photo hopefully will be exposed correctly. Now, the hard part of doing that is that I don't know what the light conditions are going to be exactly by the time the last photo happens, so I'm going to have to kind of guess on that one. So what I did was I looked up, and I'm going to put it on the screen, I looked up a photo from a sunrise from about 2 years ago that I took, and I looked at the settings for that, and then I used an equivalent exposure calculator to figure out about what my exposure should be. Now, my lens, I've played around with this lens enough that I know that taking a photo with an ISO of about 400 and an f-stop of 11 is about right, which means that my shutter speed is going to be about a 50th of a second. Now, let me take a photo and show you what it looks like at this moment. So you can see this is not entirely black, actually. It is, you can sort of see the top, but it's mostly black. We'll go with that. Now, the other thing that I want to point out is I've changed my photos over to a JPEG. Now, if you have a DSLR and you take a lot of photos, you might take photos in RAW. I don't do that for time lapses for the simple fact that I'm going to take 900 photos, and 900 photos each one is about 25 megabytes each. So that's a tremendous amount of space that you end up using for this project. So I switch them over to JPEG. Even though it's a lower quality or it's a compressed quality, it'll still give me enough to get what I need for this. Okay, so I'm gonna go ahead and start this, and then we'll talk about some other things while this is running. Okay, so I've taken a few steps back. It's about 5 minutes later than the last video. It is now 6:40. The sun is set to rise at 6:45, which means that we have 5 minutes till the sun crosses the line over the horizon. Now, the horizon line is going to be actually lower than where the mountains is, so we're not going to see the sun until about maybe 5 minutes or so after the sun rises. However, the peaks, which are up above us, should have that light basically as soon as it crosses the horizon. Now, you can see that they're starting to turn a little bit pink. That is called alpenglow, and that's where the ring of the sun first crests over the edge, but the surface of the sun has not crossed the line over the edge of the earth. So you get this like real faint pink glow from the edge of the sun hitting that mountain first. Now, today there are very little clouds. There are a few over here. Now, unfortunately, I'm not going to catch those in my picture. However, the way I've framed this probably won't make a real big difference. Clouds are a really tricky thing when you're taking time lapses because when you're setting up your photo, you have to sort of account for them, but they're also not there all the time. So they can be sort of a hit or miss. Sometimes you get them, sometimes you don't. Now, the reason why I've chosen this spot, this place is called The Thumb. The Thumb is right up above me. The Thumb is about, maybe a quarter mile from where I live. So I was able to walk here this morning without having to drive anywhere. The majority of the national park, which you see up above, is closed right now. And there's a lot of areas that I'm not going to go simply because there's too many people around. So I chose this spot because it's out of the way and it's still got a pretty good view. So there's no complaints there. Now, if you're practicing this at home, you may have to try it in your backyard or maybe even in your bedroom where you could get the light streaming through your windows. That could be pretty cool. You'd have to be creative with it. So another consideration that you want to make while you're setting up a time lapse is sort of how much motion and how much space you want in your time lapse. Now, the thing is, if you include things like trees, so like the edge of this tree is in my time lapse and the edge of this tree over here is also in my time lapse. Now this morning it's a little bit windy. It's not bad. It's about 4 or 5 miles an hour worth of wind. However, even that much amount of wind is going to make those trees shake, which means that each of my photos is going to have a little bit different impact from that shaking of those trees. Now, if we come over and look at the time lapse and where it's at, you will see that currently the foreground or the background is lit up pretty well where the mountains are. However, the foreground with the trees and sort of the valley underneath is not lit up at all. Now, this is one of the really neat things about time lapses that you can do with time lapses is that you can play with the light. So the way that this time lapse is probably going to end up looking is it'll be mostly dark at the beginning. Then the light will sort of hit this upper section up here where the mountains are, and it'll light that up. And then the sun will come up over the hills that are over on this side out of frame, and it will light up coming down into this valley. And then finally it looks like it's going to catch this tree a little bit early, and then it'll catch these other two trees a little bit later. Now it may not catch them at all, to be honest, because there is a big rock right here. So that's one thing you really need to be conscious of when you're setting up time lapses is where's your light coming from and how is it going to change throughout the course of your time lapse. It does look like there is a little bit of clouds starting to build back over here behind the mountains, which is perfect. That will be wonderful. If those clouds blow up and over the mountains, you'll get a nice sort of rush. Now, the way the clouds work in the mountains is that they typically move from west to east. They start over here and they stream up and over, and then they do this really cool thing where they build back in and around, so they'll loop like this. If we get some clouds, you'll be able to see that effect. If there's no clouds, obviously, it won't really work. Another thing that I did with this particular time lapse that I can show you while we're standing here is that I used the trees as a framing device. Now, this is a compositional technique, and the idea of it is basically that you use something in the photo to sort of block off the edges. So you block off this side over here and then this side over on this side. And I use the trees to do that. Now, that's the reason, part of the reason why I chose this particular location was just for that. Now, if you see, I'm gonna hold my video camera right behind. You can see that there's trees over here on this side that block off that edge. And there's trees on this side over here that block off that edge. Now, initially when I came up here, I spent about 15 minutes looking for a good spot, which is very typical. You definitely should not stop at the very first location you pick. I tried to go a little bit farther down over here, and what I discovered from down there was that the framing devices that would work, which is sort of, there's a tree back over here that might work, and there's a tree over back down here that would work. They didn't really work in this photo because from the only spot that was really accessible, this tree over on this side was too close to the mountain, or it was too far away. You couldn't get it in the right spacing. And then also this down tree that's over here really interfered with my ability to put my tripod anywhere down there that would be relatively accessible. So even though it looks like there would be a good spot down there, it turned out that there wasn't. And the only reason I know that is because I went down there and set up my camera and tried it. You may have to do that. Like when you set up a time lapse, you rarely end up taking it from the very first spot you set up. And the longer you spend setting it up, the better. Time lapses are interesting because the camera does not move for roughly 45 minutes, which means you're really committing to this photo. So whenever you set up your tripod, you really want to make sure you do it right before you start taking photos. Okay, it is now 6:56, so it is 11 minutes after sunrise. This is what is called golden hour for photography, and you can see why. Like, the light is this beautiful golden yellow shade, which is wonderful for taking photos. It's also wonderful for taking time lapses. Now, the cool thing about time lapses is they also change color as you take the photo. So the early parts of the photo will start out mostly blue and pink. The pink will be from the light early crossing from the sun, from the edge of the sun just peeking over the horizon. And as the time lapse goes, that light's going to transition to yellow, and then eventually it's going to transition to more of a white color. So you'll see that as it happens. Now, one interesting thing that happened here that I was not expecting is that the light actually lit up the foreground, which is over here, before it lit up this middle ground, which is the valley below. So I guess I probably should have expected it because I'm on the side of a hill, so that would make sense. Like, the light is going to hit the edge of the hill before it hits the valley. But it did sort of catch me off guard this morning. It'll just be different from some of the other time lapses that I've taken in the past. So another interesting thing that's happening with this particular time lapse is that the sun, which is way over here on my left, has to go through this layer of clouds right here that is in between that and my subject, which is Long's Peak down here in the distance. What's going to happen, now the camera cannot see that cloud bank, but what's going to happen is that the shadows from that cloud bank, which you can sort of see right here, those shadows are going to flow across the mountain. So even though those shadows are not going to be even though those clouds are not going to be in the photo, their influence, their like shadows, will definitely be seen, and it will make the photo more interesting. You can also see there's not a ton of clouds. There's not as much as I'd like, but there is some clouds building in this valley. Right up here, this is up by Chasm Lake. You can see there's some clouds starting to come off of that and starting to billow up and around. Hopefully those will build more. We have about 20 minutes left, or 25 minutes, depending on how long I let this go. So I'm not super confident that that'll happen, but it may. So, okay, it is now 7:05, so we have about 10 to 15 more minutes, which brings me to a really practical part of taking time lapses. The thing about taking time lapses is that you're stuck in one place for quite a while, so it's really a good idea to bring lots of warm clothes. I have on a few occasions brought a portable backpacking stove and made coffee while I was doing this. One time I brought a sleeping bag and slept on the beach for 3 hours while I was taking a time lapse. So be creative, don't kill yourself, and stay warm while you're doing this for sure. So it is now 7:16, which means that I'm gonna wrap this up pretty soon. I started this time lapse at about 6:35, about 10 minutes or so before the sun came up. So that'll put me about 30 minutes or so after the sun has come up. Now, if I'm taking photos every 2 seconds, that means that 1 minute of real time is 1 second of video. So I have about 35 seconds worth of video. I might let it go for about 5 more minutes or so, just so I get that last 5 seconds. One of the really hard parts about this is cutting them off too early. If you cut them off too early, you sort of miss the, you don't have any sort of transition time out of the end of it. You'll notice too some things that have changed. The mountains are fully lit up. This tree over here is fully lit up. The valley below is also now lit up, which was one of the last parts to light up. Now this tree over here, on this side over here, which is also in my shot, it probably won't get light at all just because of this great big rock that's right there. Now the tree on the other side over here, you can see it is over here, it is starting to get light. You can sort of see a little bit there, but it's not fully lit up. The wind, of course, has picked up. One of the things that you really have to be careful with is getting your tripod really well set so that it doesn't move. My tripod actually does have a little hook on the bottom of that pole that I could attach weights to if I wanted to hold it more firmly in place. Now, when I got up here, the wind wasn't blowing at all, so I didn't think I would need it. And now it's picked up to like 10 or 15 miles an hour. I've only had this camera blow over one time, but it's sort of a terrifying experience to watch your camera blow over. Wouldn't recommend it. It ruins your time lapses. So anchor your tripods down or get a really short tripod, either one. Okay, so the time has come to end my time lapse. You can see things are still changing, of course, and they will continue to change all day, but I have to go do other stuff. So it is now almost 7:25, which means this has been going for roughly 50 minutes. Now, time lapses will vary in length depending on what you're doing. If the clouds are moving really fast, they don't need to be quite as long because you get a lot of motion really fast. Now, if it's a really still day and there's almost nothing moving, you really do need them to be longer to really give any indication of like motion or change. Stars, if you're taking star lapses, those are also extremely long because the amount of time that it takes to get a good photo of the stars is about 30 seconds. So if you multiply that out, that means you're only getting 1 second of video every 15 minutes, which really slows your pace down. So you have to be outside for 3 or 4 hours to really get a decent star lapse, or have a camera that can take photos faster than 30 seconds. My camera is not capable of that. However, there are newer cameras and other brands and stuff that are capable of doing that. So I'm going to go ahead and end this and walk back to the house.